Hello, welcome to the live workshop. Today, we're going to be covering a topic called how to create brand guidelines in under 1 hour. This is a really important workshop topic for me. I have a lot of personal experience with this, both as a client and as a designer. And so I wanted to share what I've learned with this community. Before we dive in, I would love to know in the chat box, can you drop where you're calling from? Where in the world are you calling from? Maine, Germany, India, Raleigh. Oh my goodness, these are coming in so fast. Chicago. I'm from a Chicago suburb originally. North Carolina, DC. Okay, South Africa, Switzerland. So we are from like all over the world. So good morning if it's morning for you, good afternoon. And for the folks who are like staying up really late or if it's the middle of the night, thank you so much for being here. Wow. Okay, so we're coming together. One thing I love about this community is that we really celebrate making this space feel light and fun. There are so many corners of the internet, like we all know. And I think even in the design industry, there can be corners of the internet that feel like a little bit maybe shamey or not so fun or maybe a little too highbrow. And I love that this section, this community is just so laid back and so excited to make things better, make them lighter, and make them more creative and fun. Cause that's like why I got into all of this. In the chat, can you type a 1 if you were a designer of some kind, or a 2 if you were a business owner, like an entrepreneur, or 3 if you're something else, different category? I just want to know if we're like, okay, so a good mix. Designers, entrepreneurs, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I guess I'm 1, 2, 3 as well. Yeah, because designers are definitely entrepreneurs most of the time. Okay. Well, I'm Sam. I'm a graphic designer and color palette expert based in Nashville, Tennessee. I create tools and resources to help brands create perfect color palettes. I got my start in this project just by thinking, what if I could help people make amazing color palettes and not focus on any of the other design stuff that maybe I wasn't enjoying as much. So like I'm not a very good illustrator, and I found that when clients were hiring me, they wanted me to make custom illustrations. And I was like, oh, I'm not good at that. I don't like that. I just want to focus on color palettes. And so that's the inspiration behind this entire project. It's been the biggest delight. I am the one that you're going to see on a lot of these workshops and on our website. But Chris is my husband, and he is also going to be running in the chat. So he'll be answering questions. He's got a list of links that he can send out. And if you need something quickly, you can ask Chris in the chat. He's the one who develops all of our tools as well. So like our Color Palette Pro, a brand visualizer, he is the nerdy code writer who's taking care of all of that, taking our requests and bringing them to life. We're very grateful for Chris. Okay, so if you're in this workshop and you're wondering, like, is this for me? Am I in the right place? I don't want to waste an hour of my time. I don't want you to waste an hour of your time. I'm just going to go over who this is for. It's for graphic designers, brand designers, web designers, anyone who works with color or brands. But it's also for business owners, brand managers, maybe social media managers. If you saw the sign up page for this workshop and you were like, oh, that is something I need help with, like if you touch brand guidelines at all, you're in the right place and you're going to take away something really great from this workshop. And because everyone always wants to know, yes, it will be recorded and I will send out the slides later. I'm going to be moving fast. There is a ton of stuff to cover today. And I'm a visual learner, so I like to be able to see the slides. So I don't want you to feel like you have to take a bunch of notes. I'd rather you were present, able to pay attention, ask questions if you have them. And yeah, like Chris said, the slides for this one are super good. So I will send them out. You will have complete access later. Before we dive too far in, here's what we're going to cover today. I always like to know like what I'm in for. We're going to cover what are brand guidelines because that's a really important topic. We need to understand what they are and we need to understand why they matter because brand guidelines are not like some flat, unimportant thing that we just deliver to clients and then just say like, okay, I did that. I'm done. I got my check. I'm going to move on to the next project. Like they truly matter. I'm also going to show you what you should include in your brand guidelines. Spoiler alert, maybe you're including too much. I'm going to walk you through exactly what you should include and why. And I'm going to walk you through how to create brand guidelines in a way that doesn't take forever. When I was originally like creating this workshop and naming it, the original name I had for it was like how to make brand guidelines in a way that doesn't totally suck. Because like I think that they can be just a painful process if they're not done the right way. Instead, I went for a little bit more of a light and cheery vibe, but you're going to walk away not hating brand guidelines anymore if that's you. And I forgot to ask this last time. If you've ever made brand guidelines before, actually, let's do a one. Have you ever made brand guidelines? Type a one in the chat if you've created some sort of brand guidelines, either for yourself or for a client. Okay, I love that. Now in the chat, wow, so many of us have made them. Okay, so we're some experienced folks. Now type a or I swear this pregnancy brain is making me a little slower. Tell me how long it takes you typically to create brand guidelines. Like a ballpark. Does it take you like a couple hours, a day and a half, maybe 4 or 5 hours? Okay. It took me 3 weeks, more than an hour for sure. 2 days, 3 days, half a day, 6 hours, a couple of days. Okay. So it's clear that this is something that's taking time for our community. And it's not exactly the most creative work, right? Because when we make brand guidelines, we've already done all the creative stuff and now we're just like putting it together. So I kind of feel like they shouldn't take so long. So let's dive in. What even are brand guidelines? And before we get into that, we're going to unpack 2 terms here. We're going to cover what brand elements are, and then we're going to cover what brand guidelines are because they're different. Moira Rose voice, they're different. So brand elements are the components that make up a brand's identity. Things like its logo, its fonts, its color palette, imagery, messaging, things like that. And this is for a brand that I created a couple years ago. These are just some of the brand elements that were part of that brand identity. So we've got like some collage imagery. We've got this fun italics serif font, this sans serif font. We've got these colors. These are all the different brand elements. I could have made another brand that also used this font and it would have felt completely different, but these are the individual elements that made up this brand. Now, brand guidelines are a set of rules that explain how a brand's elements should be used to ensure consistency and recognition. So here's an example of what the brand guidelines could have looked like for that brand. So we've got logo, we've got some font hierarchy rules and examples, we've got some color palettes, we've got the exact collage elements that should be used, how icons and things should be used or look. And a good way to remember how all this comes together is brand elements, those individual things, logos, colors, fonts. Think of those like ingredients. So like I love to bake, especially now. And there are so many like common baking ingredients that you use in a ton of recipes. So like eggs, flour, sugar, baking powder, butter. Like most baked goods have some sort of butter. Like that's just always in stock at my house. Now I can make so many things with those ingredients. So like I have all those ingredients in my house. I don't have plans tonight. So maybe I'll be making cookies or a cake or cupcakes or brownies, something like that. But I can take all of those ingredients in my kitchen downstairs and brownies and turn them into different things. But brand guidelines are the recipe for how you take those ingredients and make one specific thing that's consistent every time. So think of your brand guidelines like the recipe to your favorite carrot cake. So whether you're using carrots in India or California or the UK, if you follow the recipe, you're going to have a pretty consistent carrot cake every time. You're not going to accidentally make like brownies when you're trying to make carrot cake if you follow that recipe. That's how brand guidelines work. I hope that makes sense. So like, why does this matter? That's always the question I'm asking because there's like so many design like rabbit holes you can go down. And I have so many design books on my bookshelf behind me and I've like taken all these deep dives and sometimes I'll read something and I'm like, oh, that's really cool. Like I learned a lot from that. But like, why does that matter? How does that apply to me as like an everyday freelance brand designer? Sometimes things just don't, they don't matter, but brand guidelines matter. And I'm going to show you with an example that will probably be cathartic for some of us. So let's pretend that these are the brand guidelines that someone uses. And the guidelines are essentially, here are your fonts and here are your colors. And so we've got the scripty font, the sans font, and then this delightful little color palette here. Okay. Like that doesn't seem that wrong, right? No, no. That is not great. I wrote, oh no, things can go so wrong so fast. And I'm going to walk you through how they can go so wrong. And if you're a designer, you might want to brace yourself because this might remind you of a particular situation or client. And we're going to talk about how we can make it better for everyone. So here was the designer's vision when they put together those brand guidelines or that list. They wanted to create this fun cosmic cupcakes website. They had all these fun gradients in mind. They thought about color contrast, imagery, all that. That's what the designer had in mind when they handed those over. But here's what the client did in real life. They just changed a few things, but they stuck to that list that they had. I'm seeing some comments. Yeah, we've all been there. So what went wrong? We're going to dissect what went wrong and how we can prevent it from happening in the future. When the designer was creating this brand, they were thinking of smooth background gradients, and the client went with stark, solid backgrounds, which gave it a totally different feel. The designer wanted bright, saturated filters on photos, and the client went with like a retro muted filter. Do you see how that like changes how much appetite or how appetizing that makes this cupcake look? Like I would so rather eat this one than this one. This one looks like it might be going bad. That can make a big difference. The designer went with correct spacing and capitalization on text. So as you can see in the script text, everything's touching, everything's nice and close together. The client decided to add one of my favorite spicy things, which is a little bit of spacing between script letters, and it changes how I feel. And you can also see like in the just launch text up here, they did that like 2006 AIM feature. I mean, that's got to come back at some point, right? I don't know if it's back today, but they did like caps, non-caps, things like that. The designer, very importantly, went with high contrast color pairing. So you notice how everything's really easy to read. You can read all the text, you can read the buttons. And the client decided to stick to their brand colors. We love that, but they're very low contrast color pairings. Everything's super hard to read. I mean, there's blue text on this pink background. It's probably like almost impossible for you to read that. And if it's hard for you to read it, it's hard for their clients to read it on their website. But okay, we're not gonna like shame the client or anything like that because technically the client did nothing wrong. They followed their brand guidelines. They followed the guidelines that they were given. The guidelines just weren't clear enough. And that's okay. That's something that we can all fix. So I'm going to share why I'm hosting this workshop because I think it might give a unique perspective. I am lucky enough to have been both the client and the designer. I think that things can be better for everyone in this scenario. So actually 5 years ago this week, the start of COVID, I had a business that did virtual mixology classes. We were not virtual before the pandemic, but we pivoted very fast in March 2020. And we offered virtual mixology classes to corporate teams who had people working from home. And it was a wonderful business. I had a full-time staff of 6 people. We would work with like all these big tech companies like Google, Facebook, Salesforce, who had teams who were working from home. And it was like a big girl business. Like it just got really big really quickly. And at a certain point, I thought, oh, I should hire a design agency to design my brand and website because I had just thrown everything together DIY. And I was like, I should have some legit stuff. So I hired an agency. They did an amazing job. I love what they created. That business is no longer around, but at the time, I loved my brand. I loved my website. throughout that process of working with the designer, I was like, wow, I love your job. You just get to play with fonts and colors all day. So I started to learn graphic design and I became a self-taught designer. And I grew that business over the last few years. And I've had clients pay me 15,000 plus to create their brand and website. So I've done both things. I've gotten brand guidelines and I've created brand guidelines. And I have seen things can go wrong for both sides. So I'm going to show you what can go wrong and how it matters. Problem number one is too much fluff. Now, this was more of something that I noticed as a client, and I am not bad mouthing my design team at all because they did an amazing job. They went above and beyond. But I'm going to share that when you're a client and design terms are just like not something that you really care about, you just want to know how to use the pretty things that your designer created for you. You don't want to scroll through a 40-page PDF to find like the hex code for your light blue. It's just really, really hard. When brand guidelines have way too much information, it can make the important stuff get buried in all that information. And it takes clients forever to find the info that they actually need, like their fonts or how much letter spacing should be on their website or what their color palette is. And something I've noticed being in the design community these last few years is that sometimes when clients hire us, especially for like a high ticket project, we feel like we have to deliver these very fancy, very fluffy, complicated guidelines to almost justify our rate. And like, I'm here to give you a permission slip that you don't have to do that. What you created, the brand elements and everything that you put together for your client, that's your magic. And you don't have to justify your rate or your creativity by making uber fancy guidelines. Problem number two is the lack of clarity. So the opposite problem of too fluffy guidelines is that they don't have enough info. So you just give them like a one sheet with like, okay, here are your fonts, here are your colors, go on with your way. It's important to not only include what, but how. So the best guidelines are kind of a blend between enough information that the client will actually follow them and use them, but not so much that they're going to get confused and then get intimidated and never actually use them. Okay, problem number three is that they're hard to find. So a super long PDF looks great when it's delivered, but it can be hard for clients to locate when they actually need it. So I'm speaking from experience here. When I hired that design agency, they delivered my guidelines. I had spent so much money on them. Like it was a major investment for me at the time. And I got the guidelines and I just remember like staring at them and being like, they're so pretty. I made Chris look at them so many times. And I just wanted to like frame them and have them right there so I could see them all the time. But in reality, that's not what I did. I downloaded them once and then couldn't find that PDF anywhere. So anytime I wanted to find something that I knew was in my brand guidelines, my process was pulling up my inbox, my email inbox, searching for my designer's name, and then finding the email where they had delivered them to me. And that's not necessarily the designer's fault. That's my fault because I had a bad process. But I think we can make it easier for clients to like have them handy and use them regularly, consistently. And yeah, that's all I need to say about that. And problem number four is that they can be very, very time consuming. Now, this is more for the creator, for the designer. I found that after brand elements are chosen, it can take 8 to 12 hours for the designer to actually create the brand guidelines, to put everything together. That's too long. I used to work when I was doing a ton of brand design. I would work in VIP days. So I would do like an 8 or 12-hour session where I would do the logos, the fonts, the colors. I would do the whole brand identity and strategy in that time. And I found that I was taking just as much time to put together the brand guidelines as I was spending putting all the elements together, bringing it together, doing the creative part. And I was like, this is not great because making brand guidelines is not that creative of work for me. It's more so like packaging my creativity. And I should be able to spend my time working on creative things and not like, I don't want to call brand guidelines administrative work because there is creativity in there. But for me, it felt very administrative and not fun. I didn't want to spend more time on it than I needed to. I also, because I was trying to like hack my process back then, I was buying templates, brand guideline templates on the places that you find them. And I found that a lot of them were very rigid and fixed. So like if the brand guideline template that I bought had 7 colors in the color palette, but my color palette had 9 colors, I was spending so much time trying to tweak it and fix it. And they just didn't like bend or flex with my particular projects. So let's spend some time learning about brand guidelines and how we can make the whole process feel better for everyone in the future. Okay, are you still with me? Type a 1 if you resonate with the problems I just shared. Okay, so these problems are real, right? Like whether you're the designer or the client or creating these guidelines for yourself, they can feel intimidating. You don't know if it should be too much or too little, and you don't want to spend more time on things than you need to, because let's face it, like time is such a valuable currency for all of us. We have things to do, whether it's in our businesses or in our lives. So I'm excited to make this better for everyone. Okay, so I'm going to share my tips for creating brand guidelines. Now, these are like overarching tips. First, you want to include the what and the how. So obviously in your brand guidelines, you're going to include the brand elements like your fonts, your colors, your logos, things like that. But you should also include how those elements should be used. And that's like the most simple tip I could give if I'm teaching someone how to make brand guidelines, is include the what and then include the how. As long as you do that, you're going to be pretty okay. Like if we go back to that recipe metaphor, it's like if you have a recipe card from a great aunt or a grandma or something, she's going to tell you like, okay, these are the eggs and you need 2 eggs and here's how you prepare them to make these brownies. If you go on YouTube, you're also going to be able to see like a very long, detailed tutorial of someone making, the world's best brownies. And they're going to be able to be like, okay, this brand of eggs is the most important. And if you want to deep dive really, really far and get very specific, you always can. But grandma's recipe just works fine. So like what and how is all you really need. Think of grandma's recipe. Accessibility is another thing you really need to keep in mind. Always make sure that you're checking your color pairings and your fonts for accessibility before you build your brand guidelines. And you want to have usable guidelines. That's the most valuable thing. So usability outweighs fluff every time. They should be clear and easy to follow. Don't include fluff just to prove value. And I hope that we can all challenge ourselves on this, because even still, I find myself wanting to include things because I'm like, oh, they'll think I'm a better designer. They think I'll know what I'm talking about more if I add this extra thing. But if it confuses them and then they don't use their brand guidelines, you're actually doing them a huge disservice. So usability is our goal. All right, it would not be one of my workshops if we did not have a chat about accessibility. So when we talk about accessibility, when it comes to brand design, most of the time we're talking about contrast. That's contrast with colors, contrast with fonts. So when we are talking about contrast, we're talking about the difference between background colors and text colors. And I have a ton of videos on my social media all about this if you want to deep dive further into this. But essentially, this example up here on the top has a light pink text on a light pink background. And then on the bottom, we've got a brown text on a light pink background. And the bottom one is clearly much, much easier to read, right? That's because there's great contrast between the background and text. We need to be thinking about this when we're designing brands and when we're educating our clients on how to use their brand elements. We have a free color contrast checker for you too. Chris can drop the link in the chat. It is totally free, extremely accessible. You can drop in any 2 brand colors and it will show you the contrast ratio. You want to have contrast ratios of at least 4.5 in order to be in line with accessibility guidelines. So that is something to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind is your font weights. So when we work with really, really thin fonts, they can be very hard to read, especially at small scales. So always be sure that your fonts and your colors are readable. I am not the expert on this, and there are some great creators out there who are, but if you want to learn more about accessibility, I recommend checking out the WCAG guidelines. That stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And if you're a designer, I will say that you are likely a lot more educated in this topic than your clients. So I would carve out some time to just make yourself more familiar with how you can make your designs accessible, because clients are not going to understand this as well as you, and you can distill that information down to what they need to know. Okay, so now we're going to talk about brand guideline elements, which is what to include in your brand guidelines and easy to understand lingo. I did not go to design school. Some of you might be watching this and being like, yeah, that's clear. I have a lowbrow approach to design. And I mean that like with so much love. Like um, I learned through YouTube, I learned through books. I didn't go to any fancy design school. And so a lot of this I like to understand through lingo that's easy for me to understand. And I find that if I can make it simple and easy for myself, I can make it simple and easy for my clients, and they're going to understand things a little bit better. So we are going to cover logos, color palettes, fonts, and some fun little bonuses. Okay, and here's where I'm going to warn you. I'm checking my time. I'm going to move fast here. I'm going to move quite fast because there's a lot to cover, and there's a lot of specifics that I included in the slides that I'm going to go over sort of quickly. You're going to get the slides, so don't feel like you have to read everything. We're not going to talk about like the origin of the JPEG today, but the information is going to be in here. So I'm going to move fast and just hold on, buckle up. So logos. Logos are a graphic symbol used to identify and promote a brand. We all know what a logo is. Every single brand should have a unique logo, and even better, have variations. So here are some things logo-wise that you should be including in your brand guidelines. You want to have what variations your brand is allowed to use. You want to know the usage rules and the formats for your logos. So when I say logo variations, what that means is like different styles of the same concept. You don't need to have all of these different variations in your brand guidelines or for every single brand, but here are some of the more common ones. You can have a primary logo. This is like the main logo that you think of when you think of a brand. This should probably be the most commonly used one. But then you also might want to have a horizontal one where it takes up very little vertical space. This is great for like the header of a website where you don't tend to have a ton of vertical space. Then sometimes you want to have a square logo, something that you can fit where the horizontal and vertical space is equal. Sometimes these are round or circle shaped. Sometimes these are square. And then last, you want to have some sort of favicon or favicon. I never know how to say it. This is like your brand stamp. It's the simplified version of your logo. This can be used for social media profile images or the favicon on your website. So like if your logo needs to be seen at like a 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter spot in a very tiny spot, you want it to be readable. If we tried to fit this logo in a tiny little spot, nothing would be legible. It wouldn't work. Now, sometimes you want to explicitly include proper ways to use the logos, and it's mostly a list of like what not to do. Now, I will say that as a designer, maybe I got super lucky with clients, but I never really saw them using their logo in like a truly horrible way. They were usually pretty smart with how they use their logos. What I liked to tell them is like, instead of confusing them with a bunch of specifics, I would just be like, don't mess with the OG logo. Like, here's where you use each of these things, and then don't mess with it. But here are some ways that they could mess with it that you might want to call out. One is color alterations. They might adjust or change the colors of the logos based on whatever they were feeling that day. Or maybe they're like, oh, it's St. Patrick's Day. Let me make my logo green. And maybe that wasn't really in line with the brand guidelines. They might mess with the scaling. So like the font, the font size for this one, these guys should be a lot smaller because that's how they were designed, to be a lot smaller. So don't scale any elements of the logo without approval. Loss of quality. This is one that I saw was very common. Don't use a low resolution file. It can lead to pixelation. It makes your logo harder to read, less fun to see. And then inappropriate sizing. Don't use the wrong variation in the wrong context. So like if you're using a website header logo, don't use one that needs a lot of vertical space because it needs to be properly sized for its context. And then finally, logo formats. This refers to the actual like logo files. There are a ton of different formats that a logo can be delivered in. Here are some common ones. I'm not going to get too deep into these, but essentially we've got PNGs, JPEGs, SVGs, and PDFs. I'm going to make this simple. PNGs and JPEGs, you can think of like images. So if you made the logo rainbow colored and you deliver it to someone, they're not going to be able to change the colors of that logo. It's just like it's a fixed image of some kind that you're delivering to them. An SVG is what we call like a vector. So it has a little bit more flexibility. You can sometimes change colors of it. You can scale it up or down. You could make it a wallpaper or you could make it a favicon. So it scales really well. PDF is really common for print. For simplicity for client projects, I typically include PNG, JPEG, and SVG. That's just my process. Now, logo storage is something that we need to think about. Where do the logos actually live? Do you host them in Dropbox, or do you put them in Notion, or do you deliver a zip drive with the logo? Like, it's entirely your choice. There's no one right way to do it. You can deliver them in a Dropbox folder and have a system of folders. You just send them a link. That's what I did. I would have them have a Dropbox folder that they could pin to their browser so they could find it easily. You could create a Notion dashboard. Some clients are really comfortable using Notion. Some of them are a little Notion averse. So keep that in mind. You can sort them into a system of folders in Google Drive. This is another really great accessible one because most people are familiar with Google. Or you could just throw everything in a zip drive and send it to your client. That works. It totally works. I personally like to sort my files this way. I first like to sort them by the file type. So SVG, meaning a vector, PNG, JPEGs being images. And then for each file type, I like to create different logo variation files so they can have like their primary logo. And then I sort them by color. So like if they have a green version of their primary logo, then I have that. If there's a multicolor version, I have that. If there's a white or a black version, I have that. And so that way they can sort through and pick their file type that they want and then the color that they need. And this is my blend of what I do. I create a Notion database where all the logo files are linked in Dropbox. And I share with them the Notion like URL so they don't have to like use the Notion app. They just have to like keep that URL pinned to their browser. I found that that works really good. Someone said I worked with a client who sent me a screenshot of their logo from their phone. I cried. I think we've all been in a scenario like that, and it's tough because that's a really hard one to work with. Oh, I also like to share this. At the end of my projects, I love to have the client send me, if they're comfortable with it, their Canva login or add me to their Canva account, and I will upload the SVG version of their logos and I'll add their color palette directly to their brand account. So I'll set up their whole Canva brand kit for them. It literally takes me 5 minutes, and I think that it saves them so much time because if they're not going to do it, then the odds of them like stumbling on their fonts or colors or logos is a lot higher. It really doesn't take me much time to do. And it's just a nice like way to wrap up the project and make their lives a little bit easier. Okay, so now we're going to talk about color palettes, which is like one of my favorite things. I'm going to try to not take too long here, even though this is where I like to nerd out. So your brand color palette is a carefully curated selection of colors that are meant to be used for your brand. It matters because staying consistent with your brand colors is one of the easiest ways to ensure brand recognition. So if you're trying to like have a consistent brand, one of the easiest things you can do is just stick to the colors that you've chosen for your brand and not deviate. Here are some color things that you want to include in your brand guidelines. You're going to want to include a color preview, color codes, color names, color formula, approved high contrast pairs, and maybe a range of transparency levels. And I'm going to go into all of these in more detail so that you can understand. So this is silly, but you should show people the actual colors that you're referring to. And what I mean by that is like hashtag 97CDF5 probably means nothing to a client. That's gibberish to them. But if you show them the actual color, they're going to understand like, oh, that's my blue. Now, color codes, that is how we quantify color into different types of codes. So it's good to give your clients as many color codes as possible so that they can access the correct color when they need to. Most often, they're probably just going to use hex codes. I'm just speaking from experience, but I like to give them different color codes. Again, I could get in the weeds here, but I won't because that's not what this workshop is. Maybe one day we'll do a color codes workshop. But the main types of codes that you're going to see in brand design are hex codes, RGB, and CMYK. Essentially, you just need to know what they look like. So hex codes are a 6-digit, well, technically 7-digit with that hashtag symbol, but it's a little tiny piece of code that represents how much red, green, and blue is in a color. So actually a hex code technically is a condensed version of RGB color. It's just a shorter way to describe it, which is very cool. But RGB measures how much red, green, and blue is in a color. This is really popular for on-screen and web design. And then CMYK measures how much cyan, magenta, yellow, and black is in a color. That is very popular with printing. So if you're doing any sort of print or product printing, you're going to probably need the CMYK codes. I tend to work with digital and service-based businesses, so we more so focus on these two types. Now, color names. This is how you actually refer to the colors in your palette. And this is so important for you as the designer, as well as the client or whoever's using the colors. You can name colors so many different ways. Like this pink, you could name it pink. Like you could just keep it literal. And also there's nothing wrong with that. Like you're not an uncreative person if you're just like, oh, I'll remember that this is my pink if I call it pink. Like that's totally fine. But you could also play around with it and have some fun. You could call it bubblegum. Or you could have it match the branding. So like one of my favorite brands that I ever worked on was for Beach Reads and Bubbly. It's like a rom-com beach reads book, social media account, and reviews library. And we made all the color names match her like brand and industry. So we named a pink like this rom-com, which was really fun. So you can have fun with it. You can keep it simple. Whatever you will use is how you should name your colors, but you should name them. Yeah, you can name colors. Yeah. And we actually have a tool that does that. I'll show you later. Okay, color roles and formula. So this is gonna be a little fun. Color roles and formula is how you actually use the colors in your palette. So like, is one of the colors maybe a hero or like a main color? And it's really important to choose a formula and assign color roles. This is probably going to be a new concept for some of you. So I'm going to just take a little time to get into it. But there are a few different color roles. You've got your hero color. This is the primary color of the brand, like the most dominant and frequently used. An easy way to remember this is when people think of your brand, they think of this color. So like when you think of Starbucks, what color do you think of? That's their hero color. Accent color is used to highlight important elements and to break the monotony of hero and neutrals. So these are great for capturing attention, but you probably don't think of them when you think of a brand. A variant color is a shade or tint derived from one of these colors. So it's just like pulled from the hero or the accent. It's just to give you a little bit more flexibility. Like a great example is if you hover over a button and it changes color slightly, that's a variant color. And neutral colors, okay, we think of them as boring, but they're so important. These are understated. Things like white, gray, black, beige, brown. You should always have a light neutral and a dark neutral in your color palette. Now, when we talk about our color formulas, these are how we actually assign which colors are our heroes, our accents, our variants, or our neutrals. And this is where I like to have some fun. So your hero color, or if you go with a hero color formula, this is when you choose one color to be the main color for your brand. This is like when people unmistakably identify one color with your brand. Like Starbucks uses this iconic Starbucks green. They also have other colors in their palette. Don't get me wrong. They've got darker accent colors, lighter accent colors, and some neutrals. But when you think of Starbucks, you probably think of this green. Now, when you think of hero color palette formula, think of the TV show Fleabag. If Fleabag wasn't a character in the show, it would be kind of a confusing storyline. Like it just doesn't really make sense without the main character. So that's what this formula feels like if it's a TV show. Now, another formula is dynamic duo. And this is where you have two colors that are iconically yours. The point is that when people see these two colors together, or even better individually, they think of your brand. So Dunkin' Donuts is a great example of a dynamic duo because they tend to use this bright orange and this bright magenta together to craft a brand identity. And something I like to share about Dunkin' Donuts is like if you were to open a coffee shop directly across the street from Dunkin' Donuts and you used orange in your branding, people probably aren't going to confuse you for Dunkin' Donuts. Like it probably won't be that big of an issue. But if you were to use orange and pink together, like that would be very confusing and you might get in some legal trouble for that. This is Dunkin' Donuts, two hero colors, and then they've got some light and dark neutral colors in their palette. If Dynamic Duo was a TV show, it would be Key and Peele. Like if Key or Peele were to leave this show, it would just have a completely different vibe if it was just one character. And you might see one of them in a movie and you wouldn't think Key and Peele. But if you saw both of them in like a sketch or a movie, you would think like, oh, this is the comedy duo that I know and love. And then the last color formula that I'm going to go over is iconic family. So that's when you choose 3 or 4 colors that represent your brand. And the important thing to keep in mind is that you use all of these colors to come together to send a brand message. So when they see all these colors, they think of your brand. Google does a really good job of this. Google tends to use these 4 colors very consistently in their entire product suite. They have some light and dark neutrals, but they use these together and that sends you a message that when you see a product, it comes from Google. And if this was a TV show, it would be Friends, which I miss so much. When you watch the show Friends, any episode tends to have some sort of storyline that covers every single character because it's all about the sum, not about the individual characters. I know. So here's the color palette formulas. I have this all together in one slide for you to reference later if you're trying to work with clients and figure out like the perfect formula. And there's not one perfect formula for every color palette. It's really up to you and how you want to use the brand. So for this color palette formula, we could have this bright green as the hero color and have these as the accents. Or we could have a dynamic duo formula where we've got 2 hero colors and then the rest are accents and light and dark neutrals. It's really up to the vibe that you want to send. So your role as designers is to assign color roles, meaning hero colors, accent colors, neutral colors, and then choose a formula for your color palette. So hero, dynamic duo, iconic family. Okay, and then you also want to show your clients the approved color pairings. So you can use tools like our free color contrast checker, or you can use the color palette tester to find all of your high contrast pairs. Remember, you're looking for pairings of 4.5 or higher contrast scores. So I like to be able to visualize all the background and text combinations and then select the ones that have 4.5 that also match the brand's vibe, because sometimes like a pair might technically have high contrast. Like I saw someone briefly in the chat talking about using orange as a background color and how that was really hard. If having orange as a background color and like black text doesn't feel good and it doesn't like if it technically has high contrast but you don't like how it looks, you don't have to approve that as a color pairing. That might just be something that technically has high contrast, but you can tell people, hey, don't use it like this. Use it like this instead. So I like to include slides like this in my brand guidelines to show them the contrast ratio, the color, the hex code. And like, I like to say like, don't do these 2 together. And then yes, these are good to go. And then color range is totally optional, but something that you can include. It just gives you more options for using your colors without cheating on your palette with new colors. So I like to include ranges of 25%, 50, 75, and 100% transparency with my palettes, just to give them more options for things like hover effects or buttons, variations that they might need on their site. Because like, I'm not mad if they're going to use this color. It's close enough to their original that I'm okay with it. Okay, and then fonts. Oh, I'm going to move fast on this one. So brand fonts are specific typefaces or fonts that you have chosen to represent your brand's voice and style in written content. These help create a consistent and recognizable aesthetic for your brand. In the chat, can you type a font that you're loving right now? If there's something that you're like really vibing with, I'm always looking to add some fonts to my library. Futura. Oh, it's a good one. Gelato. Quiche Flare. I haven't seen that. Wild Mango. Classic. Oh, a couple votes for Wild Mango. Fig Tree. Poppins. Poppins is just so classic. Taylor Penton. Oh, I was just telling Chris about Taylor Penton. I love his stuff. I think it's a he. Newsreader. P22. Okay, so good. So here's what to include in your brand guidelines. You want to include your font family, font category, font preview, font usage details, including weight, style, line height, text case, and font hierarchy. So when we talk about font family, that's the name of the actual typeface. So like when people ask, what font is that? This is the answer. When I ask you what font you're loving and you say like Perfectly 90s or Milky Shake, that's the font family. That's the overarching family. You don't have to get too detailed with the font weights or styles. We'll cover all that later. But these are examples of font families. So we know that when we talk about Edge of the Galaxy, it's going to look very different than something like Perfectly 90s. Font category is the different categories for each of your brand fonts. So, excuse me, the four main categories are heading, subheading, accent, and body. You do not need to have all of these categories, but you should have at least two in your brand guidelines. So here's like a visual of how these different categories can come together. You can have your heading font. This is like your bold or prominent font that you use for titles and headings. When people think of your brand, they think of this font. Now, your subheading font can usually complement your heading font and is used to like differentiate sections or organize content a little bit more clearly. Your accent font is like what I call the personality hire. So you don't have to have it. I'd say half my brands have it, half of them don't. But it's just like something fun that adds a little bit of personality or flair. It's really great for adding like a personal touch to a brand. And then every brand needs a body font. So a body font is straightforward, it's highly readable, and it's used for long sections of text. So like most of the content in my workshop is written in my body font. That's this font here. You can read it really easily. It should be simple and it should be so boring. And a fun way that I like to help people remember different font categories is by using SNL. I love SNL. Like if we are thinking of a heading font, think of the host of the episode, like Pedro Pascal. That's your heading font. But your body font is like the background actors. They're super important for sketches, but when you are thinking of that sketch on Monday morning, you're not really thinking about background actors A and B. You're thinking about the host. And so that's where you want to put your creativity is in your heading font, but not in your body font. You don't want to be too creative with your body font. Boring is best. And your body font should never, ever, ever look like this. It should be introverted, calm, and super duper simple. Forgettable, even. It's absolutely allowed to be forgettable. Okay, so then font preview is something you want to include in your brand guidelines. It's important to show them like what the letters in the font actually look like. And this is silly, but the phrase perfectly 90s doesn't mean much unless you're a designer, and then you probably get it. So you want to show them like, hey, this is the font family, and here's what those letters look like so they know. You also want to include font usage details. So this is how we're going to get specific about how to use each font, font weight, font style, letter spacing, line height, all that. I'm going to go through this fast, but essentially font weight is how thick the font is. So it can be thin, it can be regular, or it can be bold. I tend to go regular with my body font weights, but you might go with something different for like your heading or subheading font. So you should tell your clients how thick the font should actually be. If there are any styles that you want to put on your font, you should call that out. So should it be italic? Should it be regular? Or should it be condensed? Those are sometimes options that you can give. The vibe of italic and condensed is very different. So tell your clients which one's the proper one to use. Letter spacing. This is the amount of space between each letter. As a rule, I tend to not mess with this too much because type design, I'm friends with Jen Wagner and I know how much time and effort type designers put into creating like perfect spacing. So I tend to go with regular letter spacing, but maybe you want to shrink it down and make it a little bit smaller or maybe make it higher. Sometimes this is called tracking. You might adjust it, but usually I recommend not adjusting it. And the same goes for line height, but instead of being space between letters, line height is the space between lines of text. So like, here's what regular looks like. Here's what low line height looks like. And here's what high line height looks like. So you might want to adjust it to fit a certain project, but I tend to keep it regular. And then text case. You want to call out whether that font should be used as lowercase, uppercase, or normal case. Almost always, I recommend normal case, especially for body copy, like for a blog post. You want to just stick to like capital letter for the first letter. But sometimes you might want to play around with lowercase or all uppercase. Like I know Ariana Grande did all lowercase letters for one of her albums, or maybe multiple ones. And like that was her aesthetic, and that's great. So you can play around with that. But for body text, try to keep it normal case. And you want to put together your font hierarchy. So now that you have all your font details, it's important to include a preview of how your brand fonts actually look. So how does the subheading font look compared to the heading font? And how will you use the accent fonts? Is the mic going out? If it's going out, let me know and I'll just turn the mic off. That's no big deal. Okay, if it's fine, it's good. Okay, so font hierarchy. So your subheading font, you might call out, looks like this. Your heading font is about this much bigger than your subheading and should be used with this typeface. Here's what your body font looks like. And your body font should also be used for the buttons. So I like to give them an actual real life example of how the fonts should look when they're all brought together. And like, isn't that beautiful? But like, it would be so different if we had this typeface as the body font, and it would just make it a little bit different to read. I don't want to say harder to read, but it would be different. And there are some optional bonus things that you can include in your brand guidelines. I don't necessarily include them in every project. It just depends on the client and the project. But things that you can include are like call to action styles, patterns, illustrations, or icons. That's a really big one. Like when they use icons for their brand, are they black and white unfilled? Are they filled in? Are they maybe matching brand colors? Do they have a fun border? Like that's something that's really gonna need to match their brand style. You can also call out their imagery style. So like, are there filters put on photos? Do they tend to go with black and white? Is there a grain filter that sometimes they put on? The voice and tone. So like, what's the brand's vibe? Is it friendly? Is it approachable? Is it formal? You can call that out in the guidelines. You can also include things like mock-ups, gradients, or email signatures. Email signatures is a really fun thing that I like to gift to my clients because it's something that most clients don't really know how to make themselves. And you can make a really pretty, very accessible email signature quickly for them. And you can make sure that it matches their brand fonts and colors and includes their logo and is just easy for them to copy and paste into whatever email program they use. Okay, and I also made you a little template for a one sheet for brand guidelines. I do like to create these for my clients because sometimes there are just like certain things that they only need to access, and I don't want to make them dig through brand guidelines every time. So I always like to include a, pardon me, a little one sheet that has all of these elements in it. This takes me like 5 minutes to put together. It's a Canva template. Chris pasted it in here. Thank you, babe. You can include their logos, their fonts, their color palette, approved pairings, any design elements. It's just an easy thing to send to them to include with your more involved brand guidelines. Okay, how are we doing on time? Okay, we're probably gonna go like 5-10 minutes over, but don't worry. If you have to hop off, that's okay, but I got more. I have a little more to show you. So I'm going to show you some of my tips for creating brand guidelines. Well, I'm going to go over them again, I should say. You want to include the what and the how. So again, include the brand elements like your fonts, your logos, all that, but you should also include how they should be used. You want to make sure that things are accessible. So make sure that your color pairings and your font weights are all accessible. And understand that whenever you're making brand guidelines, the more usable guidelines are the best guidelines. So use language that's easier for them to understand. Maybe instead of saying tracking, you say letter spacing, and that's just a little bit easier for them to comprehend. So when you signed up for this workshop, you probably wanted to answer the question, how do you actually create brand guidelines in under an hour? Like, how do you technically get all of that done? My advice is to create a system that you can duplicate for multiple projects, especially if you're a designer. The best system is truly one that works for you. So it might take some time to set up if you're DIYing it, but once you find that system, you can make your life a lot easier because most clients need the same things. Here's the system that I use. I use this 1 hour checklist. This is a 1 hour Notion checklist that I follow to make sure that I'm including everything in my brand guidelines. I also use a Notion brand kit, and then I use a brand guideline builder, which is a tool I'm going to show you today. Now, Chris just sent the link to the brand guidelines 1 hour checklist. You can use that. I'm going to send it via email later as well. That link might not work. I don't know. I don't know if that'll work. It might work. But this is okay, it works. Thank you. This is a 1 hour checklist that I follow whenever I build my brand guidelines. And it just walks me through let me pull it up. Actually, I have it here. It walks me through everything I need to include. So include the primary logo, include a folder to hold the logos, make sure I have all my variations. Maybe I give myself a reminder to upload those logos to the Canva brand kit. And then I'm not constantly thinking oh no, did I do that or forget that? It's just all in my checklist. And I have it split up into fonts, colors, and then I put everything together in the brand guidelines. And then I also have a little checklist here for bonus guidelines, things that I might include. And I think I gave you guys, I gave you this template. So this is a template for making a custom email signature. Low key, this email signature thing, I posted a video about this 3 years ago on TikTok, and it went insanely viral. And it just struck a chord with people. It was the most viral thing I've ever been a part of. So just making an email signature is a really easy and simple thing that you can do for your clients. Okay, and now I'm going to show you the crown jewel, the excuse me, the brand guideline builder. This is the thing that actually saves me so much time when I'm making my brand guidelines. I'm going to show you how it works. I don't have a mic stand, so I'm actually just going to shove this in my shirt. Yeah, that works. Okay, we're going to make it work. Okay, so I'm going to show you the brand guideline builder and how we can use it to make brand guidelines really quickly and easily. And before I actually make a brand guideline, I'm going to make a color palette. I'm going to use Color Palette Pro, which is a tool that we recently just gave a little bit of a facelift to. Not a little bit, we gave it a major facelift. But I'm going to show you how I would make a color palette and then how I would put that color palette in my brand guidelines. So I'm going to make this for a fictional brand. And I'm going to use this cosmic and ethereal design style. And this is the vibe I'm going for. And then I'm just going to select some colors. So maybe I want a white or a light blue or a light purple. And you're going to see it's adding these colors to my guidelines. I'm just going to play around with it. I could also use a generator if I wanted to have it roll the dice a bunch of times. But I'm just going to assemble a color palette like this. And then I'm going to just make sure that my color contrast, I have a lot of high contrast pairs. So I'm going to use this color contrast tester. I have a ton of high contrast pairs. I'm super happy with this. This is really usable. This completely matches the vibe and aesthetic that I wanted to go for. And if I wanted to name these colors, I could click this and it will actually name the brand colors for me. And because this is a cosmic and ethereal style, it's going to match that vibe. So we were talking about color names and tools that you can use for that, this is a great one. You can even customize the theme. So if I wanted to go for something else, my mind's going blank now, but I could come up with a different theme, maybe bakery or maybe hiking, and it would change the names based on whatever my theme is. So this is how I would build my color palettes for my clients. Now I can save them. I made one earlier and I'm actually going to grab that. So this is the color palette that I'm going to be showing you today. I'm going to pop this browser out and make it a bit smaller so that I can do this side by side. And we are going to actually add this color palette to a brand guideline kit. Okay, so this is the brand guideline builder right here. And I'm going to shrink down the comments so that I can see everything. So here's the brand guideline builder. Here are all the templates that are included in it. But essentially, it's a system of mix and match templates and a base template to hold everything. It's like the thing that I wish existed years ago, and I couldn't believe no one had created it. So I spent a lot of time making all of this for designers and for entrepreneurs to create brand guidelines that they could actually use. So there's a home base brand guideline template, and then there's all these mix and match page templates, and there's bonus expansion pack templates. So I'm going to show you how this works. Here's the base home. This is where you can put everything. But the real magic is in these page templates. So I'm going to show you how you can like customize this massive database of mix and match templates. Like you can see there's 176 pages. And this is what they look like before I make any edits. So they're completely flexible for any palette size, for any brand size. But if I go up to this page, I'm going to briefly show you how I update these so quickly. I'm not going to show you the whole thing because it takes me like 20 minutes to do this entire process. But I'm going to show you just like a minute. So all I'm going to do is update the colors. So I'm just going to use the eyedropper tool and then click change all. And it's actually going to change the colors on all the pages of my brand guidelines. So this is going to save me a ton of time because I'm not going to have to update things a million times over and over again. I'm just going to be able to update them and have it change on all the pages. And then I can update my color codes. And that's where Color Palette Pro is like the perfect sidekick tool for this, because this tool will automatically convert all of your color codes instantly. So what I can do is use Canva's find and replace feature. So I'm going to hit Command F on my keyboard. I'm going to grab the color name code, that the placeholder, which is color name 1, and I'm going to replace it with the color name of this particular color, and then click replace all. And it's going to replace that color name on every page in my doc. I can also do that for the hex codes. So I can change hex code 1 to be this hex code and then click replace all, and it's going to replace it on all the slides. And you're probably like getting the pattern, but you can do that for RGB and CMYK. This slide alone takes me like 5 minutes, but it saves me so much time just doing this. And then I can also do the same for font families. So I can change this font. So I have a placeholder here of Recoleta. I can change it to be something else. So like maybe I want that font to be Louise Display. I like this font. So I'm going to click that and click change all, and it's going to update it all across my my document. If I want the accent font to be Keenstone, I can do that. And then it's going to change it on all the pages. And then I can do that same thing for font names. So I can copy the heading font name, and I can replace it with like Louise Display, because that's the name of that particular font. And then I can do the same for accent font, and name it like Keenstone, and then click replace all. So that's really all the homework that you have to do on the front end, is just filling out these 4 pages of like updating your fonts and updating your colors. I went through and actually like updated them right before this workshop. I spent 10 minutes doing all this so that I could kind of have it prepped for you. But here's what it looks like when you've added in this full color palette and all of your fonts. We've got all the fonts in here, all the font names, and all of our pages have automatically been updated. So now what I can do is I can click the color palettes page, and I'll be taken here, and then I get to choose what palette size I have. So in this case, I have 7 colors in my palette. So I can click this and it'll take me to the 7 color palette size. And I have all of these different templates that I can choose from. So like I get to decide how I want to display my colors. Do I want to do these cute little circles? Do I want to do these fun little squatchy squares? And it, if you notice, has updated all the color names and the color codes because of that little bit of homework that we did on the front end. So I can just grab my favorite one, like maybe I like how this looks, and I can click copy. And then I can go over to that base template that I was showing you before, and I can go to the color palette page, delete this box, and then just paste. And it's automatically going to have everything fitted and perfect. So that way I just save myself so much time. And then if I change my mind and like I add in an 8th color to this palette, like, oops, let me find my thing. So like maybe I end up going in and adding in an 8th color down the road. It probably wouldn't be this color, but if it was, then I don't have to move around a bunch of stuff. I just grab the 8 color palette example. So that's how you do your color palettes for this. You can also add in your logos really easily. You can just drag and drop your logos, pop them right in. Another thing that was super important to me with these brand guideline, with the brand guideline builder, is that it included some placeholder. I don't even want to call it placeholder, but it included usage descriptions that were not like placeholder lorem ipsum text. So it literally says like about your color palette. Here's what your color palette is, how to use it. This is how to use it, and you might want to go to this page to learn how to actually use these colors. Another really fun page that I love is the color codes page. So I'm going to go over to the color codes page, and then I'm going to choose my palette size, which is 7. And then I'm just going to grab this, and it literally has all of my color codes in here. So it's just something I can drop in to the live base template, and the clients will have the color names, the hex codes, RGB and CMYK codes, and it's going to give them a breakdown of like what each one of those are and why they need it. You can also play around with the color formula. So if we want to go down, we can get a description of what these color formulas are, and then we can choose a color formula and play around with it. I also made sure that in different spots throughout these templates, the chart with your color names and codes and swatches were included because you might want to reference them and you don't want to have to keep scrolling all the way up. So like maybe I want to include a dynamic duo formula. I can just copy this and I can add that in here. And now my clients will not only have a preview of what that color formula is, but they will understand a little bit more about how to use these colors. So there's so much in this, and I don't want to spend too much time boring you with it if it's boring to you, but essentially you can do things like grab your color ranges, and I included these ones that just include the lighter versions, and then this one which also includes darker versions. So if you want to give them both the lighter and the darker versions of their color ranges, you can drop that in here. There's also the approved formulas, or I'm sorry, the approved pairings. So you can have these in here. So you can include what the color pairings are that are approved, and you can include the contrast ratio. If I need to create my own, I can just copy and paste or use the eyedropper tool right here. Yeah, or you can just grab them from this tool. So like if you're using Color Palette Pro and you're like, ooh, you know what? I really like how this looks here, and these are the approved pairs, then I can, like, I've seen clients do this and I think it's so smart. They literally just screenshot it and then drop that in here, and it works great because the clients remember it and they see it and they know what these colors look like together. And then fonts, this brings fonts together in a really fun way. So it gives you templates to showcase your brand fonts, whatever fonts you want to include. So you can showcase what these fonts actually are, and it will automatically update the information. So you can customize like the font family, the font weight, letter spacing, text case, all that. So if you make changes in here, it will actually like save them, and you can share that change with your clients. And then you can give them a preview of the font hierarchy. So like how these fonts should look together. So like you can just grab this, it automatically updated with all of the changes that we made in those first couple pages. And now your clients know how their fonts should look together. Okay, and then the bonus pages, these have a bunch of placeholders for things that you might want to include as bonuses that not every brand will use. So those things like tone of voice, mock-ups, gradients, stuff like that. And the page templates have all of these bonus pages in here. So you can jump down to like icons and illustrations, and you can add your icons in here. You can even include more information about the icon style. You can include a page of like things that feel like us. You can include imagery style. I love these guys. You can like drag and drop them. So like if you're trying to create a brand voice, you can say like, okay, this is how, or this is for photos, yeah, or your imagery style. So like you want your imagery to feel more playful and maybe more vibrant and maybe focus more on people than products or the environment. So you can give people like real followable guidelines for all sorts of things, brand tone and voice, all that. So all of that is part of the brand guideline builder. I essentially wanted you to be able to make them really easily and quickly. And once you have everything in your base templates, you can update them to match your brand guidelines. So I can just update this color to match our brand guideline color. I can make this match our brand guideline heading font. And just in a few clicks, we've got, like, obviously there are more pages to copy and paste in here, but these can be downloaded and sent to a client. It takes me about 20 minutes start to finish to make a full set of brand guidelines. I say that it takes about an hour because I understand that not everyone works at my insane pace, but I want you to be able to create them quickly and easily. Okay, so that is the thing that actually saves me the most time. This is our all-in-one system for creating ready-to-use brand guidelines in 60 minutes or less. We also have a special deal for our workshop attendees. If you purchase in the next 48 hours, you can use code HAPPYGUIDELINES, and save $20. Now, we actually just changed the price of these, so you're really saving more because we've made these more price friendly for you. The best deal that you could possibly get on this tool, you can get in the next 48 hours with code HAPPYGUIDELINES, and you can also stack that code. So if you're building a bundle, like if you want to do the Color Palette Pro in the brand guidelines and have the ultimate little tool or toolkit, that discount will work with that bundle. Now, the main takeaway is to create a system that works for you. So I recommend making yourself some sort of checklist or using our free Notion checklist, putting things together in a Notion portal, and making yourself a template for building your brand guidelines. Make something easy for you to follow. Oh, okay, that was so much, moved so fast. I am so curious, what questions do you have? Joy, if you already have the color palette builder tool, we got you. You've been upgraded. You got Color Palette Pro as a free upgrade. So we sent you an email about that. Chris, can you drop the link to the brand guideline builder in here? I have not been able to keep my eye on the chat because I was moving so fast. But yes, the brand guideline builder is very affordable right now. I would say for all that you get, like yeah, it's very doable. And yeah, we do not do subscriptions. Our tools are all one-time purchases. We want them to not be a thorn or a headache. We want you to be able to get it and then use it over and over again. Was I only using Color Palette, or no, were you only using the brand guideline and Color Palette Pro? Yeah, those are the only two tools I was using. Oh, and another tool that I want to show you all is a free one. So, yay, is the Color Buddy. This is a great thing to be able to send to your clients. Color Buddy is on our website, and it is under freebies, and it's called the Color Buddy Chrome extension. So if you don't have it, you can get it here. What it is it's this little Chrome extension here that lets you keep your color palettes pinned to your browser. I made this because I wanted it. I shouldn't say I made it. I went to Chris and I said, hey, babe, could you make us a tool? And he did. So the Color Buddy, sorry, lets you take color palettes from your tools and store them in your browser. This is great because if you have like Color Palette Pro or one of our color palette tools, you can export a code and send it to your clients, and they can have the Color Buddy browser extension for free, and they can add in your little code, and then it will store colors to their palettes. Let me show you how it works. I'm going to click export on this palette that we made. I'm going to click export as link. I'm going to copy this link. Then I'm going to go over to Color Buddy. I'm going to create a new account called Cosmic Coffee. Really hope this works. And I'm going to where Cosmic Coffee. And then I'm going to paste in that Color Buddy code, and it automatically added in all my brand colors. It's going to include all the color codes, and it includes my favorite color pairings. So I can save this as a designer, and I can actually pin it to my browser. So then, like if I'm working on a VIP day for this Cosmic Coffee brand, every time I want to like access their colors, all I have to do is click this and it's pinned it to my browser. So I have their colors there like all the time. But if you're like a social media manager or a VA and you have a ton of clients with different color palettes, you can just store them all in here. or you can send it to your clients and have them pin it to their browser and just keep their colors good and handy. Okay, I'm gonna go through some questions here. I might have missed some. Build a brand guideline template has been on my to-do list for weeks. Thanks for taking it off my list. Of course, it really doesn't have to be hard, and it can be fun and easy to make and send brand guidelines. Would you recommend a what not to do page for typography? I could, but I just haven't. I guess you could like make one for like not including letter spacing if there's a particular type of font, like if it's a script font and you want to be like, hey, do not put any space between these letters, you could totally do that. I personally haven't. Okay. Yeah, if you're always running to Canva for your color codes, Color Buddy is going to be like a game changer because your codes should just be like one click away. That was why I wanted to create this tool, was because I took stock of how many clicks I was making with my mouse to access a color code. And it was like 7 or 8 clicks. And I was like, that is too many. It should be 1 or 2 clicks. And so now in 2 clicks, I have that color copied. I'm so happy. Okay, can I ask what program you use to create logos? For logos, I would say Adobe Illustrator is probably the main one, followed by Figma. I like Figma. I think it's simple and easy and it fits with my style, so I'm a fan of Figma. Yes, Chris has made us some pretty good tools. Candace, Color Buddy is not available in Firefox yet. It's on, we're aware that we can make extensions, but we have not been able to make that yet. It's just available in Chrome. Does the Happy Guidelines code work if we're buying Color Palette Pro with the brand guidelines? It should. That's a really, really good discount. Okay, can you briefly explain what the brand visualizer and font pairing tools do? Okay, so brand visualizer is another tool that Chris made for us that it's one of our most advanced tools. It allows you to visualize your brand fonts and colors and how they can come together. So I'm going to create a new project. This is going to be really fast, don't worry. And I didn't even plan on doing this today, so this is all kind of impromptu, but it gives you website mockups so that you can visualize how things come together. So I'm going to paste in that code from this color palette. So I'm going to click export, export as link, and copy. And I'm going to import that color palette, and it's going to automatically import my brand colors and sort them into light, bright, and dark. And then I can do the same for fonts. So I can bring in the fonts. This is connecting to my fonts in my system. And I can add in like DM Sans. Or do I have DM? I'm just going to do Proxima. I'll do a Persu. Good old Persu's never done me wrong. So I'm just going to add in the fonts that I have in my system, and it's going to automatically update these mockups really, really quickly with the fonts that I have in my system. I can also change things. So if I want to play around with like H1 style, I can do that. And I can apply different color styles to get a feel for like what the vibe is. So like, here's how this brand looks if we go with a light color style, but then we can also go with a bright color style. And don't you see how that totally changes the vibe? We can play around with that. Or we could do a dark color style and play with this. So the brand visualizer is a system of different mockups that you can use and play around with. It's one of our just most magical, beautiful tools. You can play around with like what the colors look like. You can even like add different colors. This was a really hard thing for Chris to code, so I always like doing that. So the brand visualizer is for visualizing how everything comes together. This is really, really great if you want to send it to clients, or if you're working on a brand project and you just want to make sure that you're not like wasting your time with something that does not come together in a way that you're visualizing. Okay, going through. Yeah, the brand visualizer is incredible. Yeah, Chris made this one from scratch. This one took a lot longer. We thought it would take 2 weeks and it took over 100 days, but it's worth it because it's a beauty of a tool. And then the font pairing kit, I will show you. Let me go back to home. Font pairing kit is a database with different fonts sorted by design style. So first you get to choose what your design style is, and then you get to choose a heading font. And it also has a database of my favorite body fonts, and it has these little style guides for font pairings. So you get to see all these different design styles. Within each design style, there are all these different heading fonts. And then I have a database of my favorite body fonts sorted by like free or premium or available in Canva or not. And then you can build these little guidelines. Our goal, like Chris just said, is always to save you more time so that you can design things and make creative things and not have to spend all of your time doing things that aren't efficient or fun for you. Gradients, no, those don't automatically populate, but they're really easy to update in the brand guideline builder. Okay, I want to let you all go and enjoy the rest of your day. I know we went a little over. Thank you for sticking around. I am just so grateful that you all come to these workshops. I thank you for letting me nerd out about brand guidelines with you. I hope that you learned something. Type a 1 if you feel like you have something that you can take away from this that will save you time. Okay, good. That's always what I want. I want these workshops to feel like a good way for you to spend an hour or an hour-ish, because your time is valuable. And yes, I'm going to be sending you the recording, the slides, and the links that Chris was dropping in the workshop. So everything will be there. Don't feel like you have to remember it all. And I just want to say an extra thank you. Thank you to everyone who writes reviews, who attends these workshops, who just supports us. This is my dream job. Chris and I get to work from home and spend all day creating tools and learning about what this design community needs. And Chris, any words you want to share?
Thank you all so much for coming to this webinar. I'm a little less sleep deprived than I was last time after staying up to 3 a.m. making sure the tool worked just right for you. So feeling a little better. But thank you so much for your support. It means the world to me. I have been doing code off and on since I was like 8 years old, and this is just like the dream job for me. And to know that it actually makes a difference for people's lives, it hits me right here. I love you all so much. Thank you for your support.
Yeah, thank you all. And thank you, Chris, for always running our chat. This might be our last workshop because we are going to be taking parental leave in a little bit. So this might be the last time we do one of these before we take leave. But thank you all. Yay. All right. Enjoy your week, everyone. We will see you next time. Bye.